Josh Lackman. I'll be a professor for property through the semester. As you can tell, today is actually my birthday. And you might not believe this, but there's really no other way I'd rather spend my birthday. So I'm very happy to be here. It's true, it's true. First, everyone get the assignments? Everyone knows what they have to do for today? Everyone saw it? Okay. Let me walk you through the syllabus very quickly before we begin actually being substantive. We won't be using Stanley or anything like that. This is my personal blog, but I keep everything for the course up here. You should have the link. It's in the syllabus. Everything you need will be on this page. The syllabus is also online. It gives you a rundown of everything that goes on in this class. This is the easiest way of getting a hold of me. You can send to my South Texas email, but this will get to me much quicker. Here are the topics we'll be covering. And just a note on participation, this will be a little bit more interactive than perhaps some of the other classes. I have something called a live chat, which I'll get to in a minute. And what it effectively allows each of you to do is kind of chat with each other and with the entire classroom at the same time. Might sound a little freaky, but it actually works pretty well. I've done in the past. So the nature of the class will be mostly discussion. Everyone's on call every day. More likely than not, I'll just go up and down the rows so people with the A's and the Z's won't get in too much trouble. I'll probably just start somewhere around here today. I'm not sure where yet. I do have a sign-in sheet, so if each of you could perhaps do me a huge favor and make sure when you write your name, you write it with your name like this so I can see it. So don't write it upside down because then I won't be able to see it. So you can please pass that around. Actually, this one, sorry, right here. So please pass that around. As far as office hours, I have two sections of this exact same class. They're exactly the same, and we keep them in lockstep. So the office hours will be the same. Mondays tonight from 7:30 till 8:30, if you're still around, or also Wednesdays from 4 p.m. till 5 p.m. You can come see me. My office is right above here, room 623, and you can see in 1 second. Just still figuring out the kinks of this classroom, so let me just resize this window a little bit. So you can actually see the entire thing. Very good. Okay. So that's as far as class participation and the like. The syllabus is pretty explicit. I'm going to do my best to keep on schedule. Every day we'll have a certain number of pages assigned to it. I will do everything in my power not to go late because I know students hate when you go behind schedule. It's just really, really annoying. It throws everything off. Especially I have two classes. So today we're going to be doing adverse possession. Wednesday we're talking about the mechanics of adverse possession, and that's what we're doing for the first week. Now let me show you the page for today. Right here is everything you'll need. I'll post this usually the day of class or the night before class. There are two sections, your section B, section D is in the evening. There are two things just to draw your attention to, the live chat and the lecture notes. And I'll open each one of these in a different tab. This is the live chat. This allows you to kind of chat with each other and chat with me. One of the big drawbacks of having a 70-person lecture class is at any given time only one person can be heard, which is sometimes very difficult. What this allows you to do is let everyone be heard, and I have the screen up here and I can kind of moderate and see what's going on. And if someone has a question, say I'm droning on and boring you to death and I'm not calling on you, you put a question in here, out of the corner of my eye I can glance at this screen and I can turn attention to it. I will leave this up throughout the class, so you'll be able to interact and you can see it. So for all of you who don't have computers, I don't think there are, maybe a couple of you don't have computers, you can still see what's going on even if you don't have the screen. The second thing which I'd like to draw your attention to is the lecture notes. I'm not the biggest fan of PowerPoint because I find that they can be a little bit formulaic and kind of fixed because you can't really change it on the fly. What I actually kind of like to do is develop the lecture notes in the course of the class. This is a Google Doc which I see at least 17 of you are already viewing. And this will allow you to see exactly what I'm doing in real time. And then, for example, like I type right here, and it will just show up right there. Everything's in real time. And then you can have access to these. These are available for your convenience. And what I'll actually do to make it really easy for you is to put both the live chat and the lecture notes in one window. It might not fit perfectly, but you'll get the drift. Unfortunately, we don't have full widescreen capabilities, but it's pretty good. So you'll see the chat here, you'll see the lecture notes here, And they won't fit perfectly, but it'll be pretty good. And you'll get a sense of what's going on. And is that font big enough? Can everyone see it? Can everyone on the side see it as well? Okay, good. All right. So that's what you'll see for the majority of the class this year. As far as following the class, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. If you guys like Twitter, you can follow us on Twitter, RSS, Facebook. What I would recommend you all do is go to this page and put your email in this box. What this will do is give you a daily digest of everything we send. I'm not expecting to spam you too often, but this is a lot more consolidated. You'll get one email a day at 11:30 p.m. right before you go to sleep, so you know exactly what's going on the next day. And I think that is about it, and that's about all I'm going to cover for now. Well, you never say I'll drone on. You haven't heard me yet. But I think you'll enjoy this format. So I'm going to put this on full screen, and that should work. Okay. So I'm going to start class today. Just a brief note. Any Aggie alums here? There was just actually a shooting at A&M you might have seen. I don't mean to make light of that, but it seems that the shooter's been apprehended. And I'm sure the story is still developing. With these kinds of things, the story's always kind of changed. So you keep an eye on it, and my thoughts and prayers with the victims. Horrible way to start class. But I guess we're in Texas now, so that's what we have to do. Yeah. Okay, so let's get started. I'm actually going to start here with a video, which some of you might have actually seen. We're doing adverse possession today, and this is something which I had never heard of before I was a law student. So let's see if the audio works on this. Yeah, that's okay. Just keep going. I'll clean it up later. I'll clean it up during the movie while the movie's playing. Okay, the audio works.
What if you could live in a new home without a mortgage? A man in Flower Mound has done it, moved into a $300,000 house, and he only paid $16 to do it. It's a little-known Texas law, and the foreclosure mess could have him living on Easy Street, but his neighbors, well, they're less than thrilled. Cadillac's Casey Norton has this exclusive from Flower Mound.
Flower Mound's Waterford Drive is lined with well-manicured $300,000 homes. So when a new neighbor moved in without the usual sale, mortgage-paying homeowners had a few questions.
What paperwork is it, and how is it legally binding if he doesn't legally own the house? He just squats there.
Lee Lowry and her husband told me the house down the street was in foreclosure for more than a year. The owner walked away, then the mortgage company went out of business. Apparently, that opened the door for someone to take advantage of the situation. Kenneth Robinson told us he's no squatter. He says he moved in on June 17th after months of research about a Texas law called adverse possession.
This is not a normal process, but it's not a process that's not known. It's just not known to everybody.
Robinson says this piece of paper gives him rights to the house. It's an online form he printed out and filed at the Denton County Courthouse for $16. He says the house was abandoned, and he's claiming ownership.
I went through, looked at it, and added some things here, you know what I mean, for my own protection.
The house is virtually empty, just a few pieces of furniture, no running water or electricity. But Robinson says just by setting up camp in the living room, Texas law gives him exclusive negotiating rights with the original owner. If the owner wants him out, he would have to pay off his massive mortgage debt, and the bank would have to file a complicated lawsuit. Robinson believes neither is likely, so if he stays in the house, after 3 years, he can ask the court for the title. That's your goal eventually, is to have title of this home, to be the owner of this house.
Absolutely.
And
I'm on record, you know what I mean, at this point, you know, since I possess it, I am the owner.
Robinson posted no trespassing signs after neighbors asked police to arrest him for breaking in. But Flower Mound officers say they can't remove him from the property because home ownership is a civil matter, not criminal. Lowry and her neighbors continue to look for legal ways to get him out.
Or if he wants the house, buy the house like everyone else had to. Get the money, buy the house.
Robinson says he's not buying anything. As far as he's concerned, the $330,000 home is already his, and he has the paperwork to prove it. Casey Norton, Channel 8 News.
Now, foreclosures are down for the 6th month in a row in North Texas. August filings fell 14% compared to last year. However, something to keep in perspective. Foreclosures are still 313% higher than in August of 2000.
All right. So, as someone has already tipped us off on the live chat, the mortgage company did indeed end up kicking him out. I was going to say, what do you think happened? But you ruined it. This is just as well. So let's assume you didn't know what happened. Let's assume you don't know what's going on. We have a situation where we have a very high foreclosure rate in Texas. I'm sure any of you homeowners have ever bought a home. Congratulations, Kate. You will be very useful this semester because I've only rented. So this will be actually a very good learning experience for all of you. So this is a case we have a very high foreclosure rate. You had an owner of a house who's underwater. He walked away. This house was probably going to be sitting there vacant for years. Mr. Robinson, in his wisdom, went to the law books, looked up this procedure, and said, hey, under Texas law, if I'm here for 3 years and I'm adversely possessing this house, I get to keep it. Just a show of hands, who here has some sort of empathy for Mr. Robinson, that they kind of feel for the squatter? Okay, so about maybe half. Who here thinks he should get the hell out of the house and agrees with the neighbor? All right, I don't know your names, with the sunglasses. Why do you think you should get the hell out?
I just don't think you did it the right way. I mean, I guess it's legal, but still.
Well, what's the problem?
I mean, it's essentially stealing from somebody that owns that house. The bank put up the money for a loan originally, even if the bank's not there. I mean, somebody still has probably $300,000 outstanding.
But is he stealing it? I mean, the Texas Supreme Court is called adverse possession. The doctrine itself is a harsh one, taking real estate from a record owner without express consent or compensation. I mean, that's how the Texas Supreme Court's characterized this doctrine. Is it really stealing?
I don't know what stealing is, taking from someone without compensation.
Is it?
I think so.
Well,
You know, the title.
so who here agrees with Mr. Robinson and thinks he has a good case? Right next to you, yeah.
Yeah, because with him squatting, so to speak, in the house, he'll be maintaining it. He'll prevent it against deterioration and against vandalism. So he's actually improving his property value and maintaining his neighbor's property value by not letting that house go into disrepair. So if he's doing that, he should get to keep the house if he follows the legal channels.
I mean, I'm sure you've all seen neighborhoods where you have a lot of foreclosed homes, and the entire house just goes to disrepute. It just becomes an absolute waste. And then Mr. Robinson did something smart. He signed what's called an affidavit of adverse possession, so that there's no doubt of when his period began. So I'm just going to do a little experiment. So I mean, you guys all agree with the notion of adverse possession, and I brought these cookies in purely for birthday reasons, but also for other reasons. So these are my cookies, right? I brought these in, and I offered them for all of you to take. Now, some of you might not have gotten one at the beginning of class, but maybe I'll wait till the end of class to get one, right? They're sitting there. I decide I'm going to take them back. I said, these are your cookies. I gave them to you. In fact, I already have a color title on the board. It says, please take a cookie. That's your effective deed. But you've been sitting here for 3 minutes, and then no one's taken them. So I'm going to take them back. How do you guys feel about that? It's just something so simple, but you've had these cookies. You had this claim to a cookie, but you didn't use it. You didn't take it. You just let it sit there. You let life fallow. And then you weren't making good use of it. So I'm going to take a cookie and take a bite out of it and, make economic efficient use of it. I'm improving upon the cookie. What kind of goes through your mind when you put yourself in the mind of the neighbor and of Mr. Robinson? Yeah, Matt?
She had an equal chance to sit on the house if she wanted to, just like he did.
No, why didn't you take the damn cookie yourself? Or let's take the flip side. Does anyone think that, hey, he's stealing my cookies, those were mine? Does anyone, because you had this claim to a cookie for just a few minutes, while I put that note up, and a lot of you see didn't take it, you kind of just let that life fallow. They needed your cookies, you didn't take it. Your fault. Wow. Thank you, Steve Jobs. That's actually still working. I have no idea that's still working. Let's see if that works. Huh. Wow. Good. Anyway, I'm going to have to figure out a better solution for this than this little lip, which doesn't seem to be strong enough. Anyway, so just something as simple as cookies. There's a lot of ways of looking at this. Something called the endowment effect, the prospects theory effect, which basically says if you have something that's yours, and then someone takes it away from you, you're going to miss it a lot more than if you never had it in the first place. So the fact that you own this property, and then someone took it away from you, you're going to be much more invested in it. If you have a case where you never took the cookie in the first place, for those of you who didn't take any cookies, you probably don't give a damn if I took them back because you never had it in the first place. Here, adverse possession really works between the owner of the land and the squatter, the person who had it in the first place and lost it. This neighbor really has no claim to it. She didn't really do much about it. But there's also kind of an economic argument. Someone mentioned, I think you said, you're improving upon the land, you're not letting it disrepute. You guys know Judge Richard Posner in the Seventh Circuit. He does a lot of law and economics stuff. He says if you use the land effectively, if you improve upon it, you mow the lawn, you put up trespassing signs, you keep people out, you're making sure the weeds don't grow too big, you're sitting there, you're doing interviews with the news, you're actually making good economic use of the land. And perhaps that's one reason why they should be able to keep it. So this is adverse possession. It's a very cruel doctrine. It's very bizarre because usually in property law, you study an entire semester of property law, you get property for doing something right. You execute a deed. You write a will where you say to my son and my devisees and until perpetuity and all that stuff. You have to follow all these onerous rules to get property. But this is kind of the outlier. This rewards for being a jerk. It really does. It rewards you for doing something which you probably should not be doing. And I think there's a couple of different rationales for it. In the notes, you see Justice Holmes, who said, you snooze, you lose, basically. If you sit on your right and you don't use it, why shouldn't someone else get it? If you're just sitting there and the property is not being used, why shouldn't it be used in more effective things? We learned about property as kind of a bundle of sticks. It's not an absolute. It's certainly not an absolute. It's a way to aggregate various aspects of your property rights. Now, another way of looking at it is just rewarding the person who cultivates it. You guys remember Pearson v. Post, the fox case? Remember, it was one guy chasing the fox, the other guy with the dogs and the hounds and everything, and another guy who swooped in at the last minute, and he was a jerk who caught at the last minute. Who got to keep the fox? The guy who did all the work, or the guy who swooped in at the last minute? This isn't that much different. You have some guy who owned the land for a number of years and kind of didn't actually do something with it, and then you have the guy who swooped in. And if you think about it, it creates a lot of certainty. One of the main reasons why we have adverse possession is the quiet title, very simply. Quiet title is a process by which you say, okay, who owns this piece of property? When a piece of property is sitting fallow for a number of years, it becomes unclear who's actually owning it. No one knows who owns it. Evidence gets stale, memories get faded. By doing this within 3 years, it allows someone to come in and say, hey, this is my land, and this is my property. And this actually simplifies the process. So that's one rationale. The other most simplest rationale is just simplifying it. This is easy. If there's been someone on the land for a number of years taking the property and living there, that's his property, or her property. You're not going to know who had it 30 years before. And in many respects, it's kind of unfair to expect someone who maybe owned the land 30 years prior to come in and expect to, have a claim to the property. Put this in. So those are some of the major rationales for it. And then just something simple as a cookie kind of illustrates the fact that you have more of a stake in something you already have. So what I was planning on doing was taking a cookie. What's up?
Your computer is slipping.
Oh man, this is not. Let me take out really this podium. Actually, you know what? I came in here on Saturday for about 30 minutes testing this stuff out. I didn't think about gravity. Tested everything else out. Okay, let's try this, if this works. I think I'll get some sort of ledge or something. There's the podium. Here we go. This one will work better, because that's the thing. Sorry, I should have done this before. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, this one's not going anywhere. So this is kind of adverse possession. It's kind of a cruel beast in many respects because it rewards the person who stole, rewards the person who kind of did the wrong thing. But I'm not convinced that it's necessarily a bad thing. I think there are a lot of good aspects to adverse possession. So let's start by the first case. Let's go to, let's see. Can someone pass the seating chart up, please? Oh, you're not done yet? Okay, that's cool. That's fine. Okay. So let's just kind of go over the black letter elements if you will. And these are in the notes, but kind of the black letter elements. And these vary by state. In a few minutes, I'm going to talk about the Texas elements, but these are just the general elements. So first, I promise I'll get this clear. You have to have an entry. Unless you enter the land, you don't get any claim to adverse possession. There are some exceptions. For example, if you have some sort of constructive claim, it's a land that one couldn't quite enter. Say it's like a garbage dump or a waste dump, and you have effective control over it. That's fine. But at the very least, you need some sort of entry. You need to actually have some sort of claim to the land. Second, it has to be open and notorious. It's actually kind of funny and nerdy. When I was preparing for class, I was listening to Pandora, and Biggie came on. I was listening to this as like the Notorious song. So, if nothing else, that will help you remember this. Just think of Biggie. It has to be open and notorious. You can't have it. It's true. You have to have some sort of hostility or animosity. There are various different states of mind which come around, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But it has to be notorious. It can't be mistaken. You can't say, "Oh, I thought that was my land, but maybe it was your land." That's not good enough. You have to have some sort of animosity. Otherwise, it's far too easy for someone after the fact to say, "Oh, that was my land all along, but I didn't tell you that until 3 years passed." And that's not good enough. The third element is the continuous for the statutory period. This one varies most by states. In a few minutes, I'll talk about the Texas version, but needless to say, depending on what state you're in and what specific jurisdiction you're talking about, there are different rules. In Texas, as Mr. Robinson said, it's 3 years when you're under color of title, when you have some sort of defective paperwork, 10 years generally when you have no paperwork. I'll come back to that in a minute. The fourth element, though, is there has to be adverse under a claim of right. What does that mean? You have to have some sort of claim to the land. You can't just say, "Oh, I think that's mine." You either have to say, "Well, I have this deed, I got it at a tax sale, and this says I have the claim to the land." Or you can say, "Well, I know it's not my land anyway, but I'm going to keep it anyway." You have to have some sort of, you guys are lawyers, you have to have some sort of reason why you think it's a land. You can't just say, "Well, I want it." There has to be something. I'm using this land, I'm cultivating it, just give something to the land. And you don't have to actually be on the land for the entirety of the 3 years. That's kind of stupid. You can come and go as you please, but there has to be some sort of continuous usage throughout. All right, and let's get started with the first case of the year. And thank you, ma'am. And what I'll frequently do. Okay, so how many of you guys are all from Texas? Or how many of you are not from Texas? See, what I like to do is whenever there's a case, call on a student from the state who they've, if the case is from New York, call someone from New York or Jersey or whatever. But I don't think that's going to work well. So I'll have to get creative. Have any of you ever traveled outside of Texas? Has anyone ever been to New York? Okay. Has anyone ever been to Yonkers? Anyone know where Yonkers is? Okay, you. Let's see if I can get the names right. Matthew Patilski?
Martin.
Martin Patilski. Okay.
Would you like me to stand?
No. Okay, you don't need to stand. This is very informal. Just sit where you are. And I'll call on you in a minute, but I just want to introduce the case a little bit. So this is Van Valkenburg v. Lutz, which is kind of an awesome name for a first case. And it's from Yonkers. And in case some of you couldn't tell, I'm actually from New York, from a place called Staten Island, which is effectively New Jersey, just to give you a sense of where things are. And I actually have a satellite photo. I went to Google Earth, and I got the rough location of where this class is. This is on the class blog, so you can pull this up yourself. So this is roughly what's going on in Van Valkenburg. So we have here this plot of land in Yonkers. Here are the main streets. So there's Gibson Place on this side. There's Leroy Place or Leroy Street. I think the record is actually ambiguous which is which. I think there's something called a paper street. Did anybody see that word that knows paper street? You know what that is? It's effectively a street they put on a map that doesn't exist. And I Wikipedia this. If you watch the movie Fight Club, Tyler Durden lives on Paper Street. Yeah. Very useful. Very useful. So this is the map where everything is. So you have this Leroy Street. So the Lutz is lots 14 and 15 right here. And they built their house there. And they didn't like crossing this street because it's steep. So what they did was they made kind of a right-of-way cutting across this way to Gibson Place. And there's this kind of triangular-shaped lot. This is lots 19, 20, 21, and 22. And they lived on this land forever. This is a little tree, you can't really see it, but they built a little garden there where they cultivated it. Their son Charlie has his house or a shed, and I'm not sure what it is. They did something to the land. So all was well until these von Valkenburgs swooped in like the Blitz in 1937, and they built this other house right there in kind of the adjacent way. And they didn't like that the Lutzes were kind of putzing around and then making a fuss. They weren't too crazy about that. So what they ended up doing was they actually bought all of this land. Now the litigation gets a little funny because the Lutzes didn't have a very good lawyer. And one lawyering lesson for all of you: never concede your clients wrong on anything ever, because it comes back to bite you. And this is a case where it comes back to bite them very, very badly. So the lot was purchased here, and just forget my mouse. Here we go. So the lot was purchased here, and then there were a number of lawsuits that were filed. The first such case involved the Lutzes. So the Lutzes didn't try to claim adverse possession over the entire thing. What they actually wanted was called kind of prescriptive right. So the Lutzes wanted, effectively, you'll learn this term later, kind of an easement or a right-of-way. They wanted a right-of-way to cut across that property, that little strip right there. The trial court actually ruled for Lutz, meaning saying he's been there long enough, he gets the property. And then the case was appealed to the New York Court of Appeals. This is the highest court in New York. Maryland and New York, just so you know, the only two courts I know of are the highest court of last resort. It's called the Court of Appeals. In fact, in New York, the trial court is called the Supreme Court. If you go to a trial court in New York, they're actually called justice. It's kind of weird, but that's how it works in New York. It's been like that since Hamilton's time. So this case gets appealed to the Court of Appeals, and sir, so what are the two main opinions? What are the two main schools of thought that happened?
Well, they reversed the opinion. They reversed the trial court, and they said the proof failed to establish actual occupation for a long enough time period, which is required for adverse possession.
Did they say they didn't have possession of the entire thing or part of it, or what did the majority say?
Well, they said that it wasn't protected by any sort of substantial enclosure.
Mm-hmm.
There's no proof to actually show cultivation. Enough to claim title over the whole premises.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They failed to show again that any of the premises was improved enough to actually allow for adverse possession of the whole.
Right. They didn't. The key was they didn't have possession of the whole. The word WHLE. They didn't have possession of the whole. We'll talk about constructive adverse possession in a minute, but the key was they didn't have possession of the whole. Now, did the majority make much of the fact that they had this garden, that they cultivated it, that they actually kind of built it and developed it? Green shirts, it's the next to your left? I'll learn your names later. So did the majority make much of anything about the fact that they had a garden there, that they improved it, that they cultivated the land? Was there anything about that?
It would seem more in the dissent, but it seemed like the majority said that wasn't enough done to the land, that more care needed to happen to transform the property.
Mm-hmm. So in cases like this, we talk a lot in law about burdens. Who did the majority put the burden on? The squatter or the owner of the land? In other words, who had the burden of proving that they were there? Yeah, the squatter, exactly right. The court effectively put a serious thumb on the scale in the favor of the owner. I think the guy with the sunglasses, you probably like this judge, where he really favored the owner of the house rather than the squatter. He said, you know what, yeah, they had this stupid little garden, but that's not enough. And yeah, they had some trees and chicken coops and sheds, and part of it they didn't have in the whole. So in many respects, the majority was quite dismissive of what happened. And they made a lot of effects on what's called a waiver or a concession. You probably learned about this in trial procedure classes. But in many respects, Lutz waived an issue. He said that, where is it? He knew that it wasn't his land. He conceded that the other guy had title to it. And that concession was very dangerous because we made that concession. He couldn't then claim later, oh, I thought it was mine. By saying, oh yeah, I know that's his land, but I'm just being a jerk. You just, in many respects, according to the majority, killed your adverse possession case. We'll come back to that in a moment. The dissent somewhat had a different conception of that. But there's kind of an estoppel, if you remember that term from CivPro. You're stopped from arguing this. So that's what the majority said. Okay. One over, sir? Yes. So tell me, what happened with the dissent?
Dissent pretty much reversed what the, well, obviously
Reversed
what the majority said, but they said that that he had actually done a significant amount of work and that he'd been there since, I think, 1916 and had a garden there since 1920. He hadn't held a job in like 25 years, and that he cultivated the land using, everything from trees for fruit to having his yearly crops that he would sell to the neighbors and do odd jobs. So they thought that he had actually done enough to possess it. And the idea that he needed to make a claim that was outright to the land to be able to adversely possess it wasn't as necessary.
Right. So, in your estimation, the dissent was pretty critical of the majority. He basically said you ignored a lot of evidence. Do you think that's a fair characterization?
Yes.
Why do you think that?
Well, I think that if you read the majority opinion, it's I just felt it was kind of slanted, that they didn't use a lot of the same facts that you find in the dissent.
Mm-hmm.
He'd done as much work, and I thought the dissent kind of mimicked the background information that we got at the beginning of the case, where you learn a lot more about what had happened, and I felt like the dissent was drawing on more of those facts.
Right. You'll find this a lot, especially if you're taking common and other classes. You'll frequently read the majority and dissenting opinions, especially in appellate courts, and you'll feel like you're looking at two totally separate cases. It's like if you just read the majority snippet, you say, oh yeah, piece of cake, the Lutzes don't have it. And then if you read that little introductory blurb as well as the dissent, it's like, oh my God, look at all this information. There's this chicken coop and all this other stuff, and their family's been on it, and the kids have been playing, and they've had this land. You have this long-standing litigation. You have these von Valkenburgs who just kind of swooped in at the last minute, and they really, they're just being jerks. It really paints a different picture. Now, can someone respond to the point the majority made that Lutz waived the fact they didn't have title? Does anyone who wants to be a good lawyer can think of a way around that, or an argument? And the dissent makes this point. Sir, with a green shirt?
Basically, he was acting on the advice of this bad, like it said, erroneous advice of a lawyer. Maybe that's...
Bad lawyering doesn't get you off. Yeah, if any of you ever do appellate work, don't say to a court, my trial lawyer was bad, because that won't get you anywhere. That's called a waiver. Sir, I think your hand was up in the... Yes.
The dissent said that the giving admittance of ownership is only evidence to acquire your previous possession of it. So he's just stating, yeah, this guy did have it, but now it's mine. You can characterize it like that.
Right. I think that's slightly not exactly what I was asking, but that's correct. The fact that your hands up? Yes, please.
That he had already had adverse possession, and to transfer title, he couldn't do it orally.
Yeah. Yes, that's correct.
Even when he conceded, it wasn't valid.
Exactly. Yeah, that's part of what I was getting at, and I'll elaborate on this in a minute. Just because you say, shucks, you're right, I don't have it, that's not enough, because you've already had title. If any of you own a home, if you say to someone, you know what, you're right, I don't own this home, you still have your house. This thing called the statute of frauds and various things, transactions of a certain amount of writing, contracts, you remember the similar stuff in property law. But the fact that he said this afterwards, and it's come also in the Manila-Vigorski case we'll talk about in a few minutes, this also comes up. So what I was actually looking for was, it doesn't matter that Lutz acknowledged he didn't have title. That's the point. The entire point of adverse possession is you don't have title. That seems somewhat counterintuitive on the part of the majority. Usually the people claiming adverse possession don't have title. And they try and claim it not having title. So I think the majority kind of twisted the facts a little bit and make a very compelling argument which doesn't hold up. If it were the case that only people with title or some defective title could claim adverse possession, Mr. Robinson would have been out of luck. He would not have any luck whatsoever. So it's not enough that you say your lawyer messed up, because lawyers mess up all the time. Hope none of you ever do, but you probably will. And then if your cases ever go up in appeal, if you ever guys have appellate lawyers, frequently the judges will ask, were you the trial counsel? And when the answer is no, they say, okay, well, this guy messed up, he's trying to clean up a mess. But when the answer is yes, the judge is saying, okay, This is your problem. You have to sit in it, and there's not much you can do. You waive the issue. So this is a case where you really have two competing views. You have one. Let's see if I get your name. You're on the third row. Stallings, Andrew? Yes. So like Andrew Stallings, he would be kind of the majority approach where he says, this guy is just being a jerk. He doesn't really own the land. The Van Valkenburgs bought in the tax sale. This little chicken coop and these various things, they don't really matter. Then you have the dissent. Who here likes the dissent? Right there with straight head, yes. So you like the dissent? Why do you like the dissent?
I think they just make very good points that, Mr. Lutz had been on the property. He did all of these things, and those were all significant. And it's just like, I'm not sure who said it, but I think the majority ignored a lot of that evidence. And I think it's also important the dissent pointed out that adverse possession doesn't require that he was on the whole of the land.
Yes,
that
exactly.
Was the point that I really liked.
That's correct. We talk a lot about in law of kind of formalism and kind of functionalism. These are kind of two jurisprudential thoughts. And a very formalistic, rigid reasoning would read something like, if you're not on all the land, if you don't, plant wheat on every single acre or every single inch of every square inch of the property, you're not using it. And that's a very harsh rule. Talking about rules and standards, that's very harsh. I think if you look kind of more flexible and say, listen, it's impossible to use this entire triangular plot. It's a lot of land. Actually, if you go to Yonkers today, there's actually, I think there's some sort of Orthodox church. You can kind of, Prophet Elias Greek Orthodox Church. It's a pretty huge plot. And I'm pretty sure you can't cultivate every last inch of it. It's almost kind of like feudal terms, like how many serfs do you have to farm the land? It's kind of silly to have that. But I think it's a very formalistic, rigid approach. Now, who here likes the approach? The other approach of making it really tough to prove adverse possession. Stallings, yes?
Why?
Why do you think? Do you think that you have to occupy the whole thing? Do you think that's a good standard?
Yeah, I think it should be as tough as possible. If you want to own half the world and not do anything with it, it should be your right to own it.
Okay. And then because we have it in the chat, so this might be a torts question, but this happens a lot. And you guys remember something called self-help? Have you ever heard of that expression? And this might be bigger in Texas than elsewhere. But if someone's on your land and the 3-year period hasn't run yet, you can try to forcibly eject them. And you have to do so consistent with the law. I don't know if running defense of property. I don't know if running after children with a pipe or perhaps doing something more violent is a useful, legitimate use of force. Perhaps in Texas, I don't know. But I'll assume it's not. In other words, if you have a squad on your land, kick them out before 3 years. If you call the police before 3 years are up, you're in good shape. But if there's actually a legitimate claim to adverse possession, you're going to have a hard time because the onus is on you. If you've been sitting there and waiting for 3 years, you're going to have a harder time proving that you had this claim of right. So this is Van Valkenburg v. Lutz. It's funny they choose the cases they do for law books. It's kind of just like a bizarre case that doesn't really make much sense. But it has such interesting facts of these feuding families. It's kind of just cool. So what happened afterwards? There was reversal. Judgment was entered in favor of the Lutzes. I'm sorry, the Van Valkenburgs. After judgment was entered in their favor, the Lutzes lost. They had these huge legal fees. They had all these New York, Wall Street lawyers handling their case. So they had to sell their beloved lot 14 and 15. So this is tragically gone. They had to sell it to pay their legal fees. And frequently with land use, you'll see that the only way to cover your bills is to actually sell the plot. Because it's not like real personal property. You can kind of sell it up and chop it off. Here, you got to get rid of the entire thing. In subsequent years, kind of the New York Court of Appeals didn't like this rule. They thought it was very harsh. They agreed with her and others that this is a very tough rule. So they kind of relaxed it back, and they kind of winded it back. And eventually, this kind of standard was eroded. So that's Van Valkenburg v. Lutz. It's kind of a weird case, but I think it tees up a couple nice issues about state of mind, which we can talk about now. Do you guys remember criminal law? Did you study in criminal law state of mind? How the same act, if done in 3 different ways, can have totally different criminal culpable liabilities. And it's actually not that different here. So how would you characterize the majority opinion in von Valkenburg? Did state of mind matter or not? Yes, why?
Well, didn't they say that he said that he admitted that they had the land?
Exactly.
So they wanted him to, I guess they're saying that because he was hostile in taking the land, that they weren't going to be favorable toward that kind of state of mind, I guess.
That's exactly right. And that goes to state of mind. As we all know from criminal law, proving state of mind is very, very difficult. That's why you have these burdens and you have trials and all this stuff. Here you have an appellate judge reading his state of mind based on some blunders a lawyer made. And some of you might think that's quite unfair, and in many respects it is. So this is what's called the kind of a good faith standard where the state of mind matters. You have to have some sort of state of mind that you know you're actually invading on the land. How would you characterize the dissent? Do you think, according to the dissent, the state of mind mattered much? Front row, right here.
No, I don't think so. No.
Why?
I think what was important was just
Did the dissent focus more on what Lutz said and did? I'm sorry. Let me say it again. I said it wrong. Did the dissent focus more on what Lutz said or what he did?
what he did.
And what did he do?
He made use of the land, and he was there for a substantial amount of time.
So what's easier to prove? What someone's thinking or saying, or what someone actually did?
What someone did.
So, right. So this is the objective standard. This is kind of the second school of thought. And this is very easy to prove. You kind of say, all right, we'll ignore the fact that he didn't say the right things. Not everyone can be smart as Mr. Robinson and go on the local news and file this affidavit and be a very, very stark and strong person of how he wants to adversely possess this property. Some people are going to be more like Mr. Lutz. Like, he doesn't know that property law. He was just I think he was a craftsman of some sort, didn't really know the ins and outs of law. But he said, you know, this is my property. So the dissent would adopt the kind of objective standard. And this comes back later. This was adopted in the Manila Vygorsky case, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So that's kind of the good faith standard. So now you have the standard I think Andrew Stallings would like, which is called the aggressive trespasser standard, or maybe not. This makes it really hard to allow adverse possession because you actually have to show that you're adverse and hostile. This is very difficult to show. If there's some confusion between neighbors, this isn't going to cut it. If there's some ambiguity about who owns the property, it's not going to cut it. You have to be Mr. Robinson here. This is Robinson. You have to go on and say, listen, I know Bank of America owns this home. I don't care. I'm going to be here for 3 years and you have to throw me out otherwise. This is the toughest standard because you really need a real SOB to prove it. But I think once in a while you have it. And this is Mr. Robinson. And if you look to the Manila case, this is like the main line of cases. There was that Connecticut case, that Maine case. This is kind of the main case. Scroll down. Sorry about that. If I forget to scroll, please tell me. We'll figure out these kinks, I promise. The stalling standard, what's that? Ben House, what's the stalling standard?
Stalling standard is what I propose is the name for stalling favor standard.
Oh yeah?
That being the objective standard.
Okay. Anyone second that motion? Second? So we have consensus? Okay, so the hard line, bright line rule will be the stalling standard. Can we keep that for the year? Okay, so who's the opposite of stalling? Who will be the flexible? Is that you?
No.
Who's the opposite? Who's the the facts matter and we need to look at the circumstances and think of the children and the poor Lutz kids? I mean, who's the? Is that you? What's your name?
I think of the children.
You think of the children? Okay. So what's your name?
Patrick Phillips.
Phillips? Okay, so we have the Phillips and we have the Stallings. Okay, well, that'll be useful. You can beat up your classmate later for selling you out. All right, so this is kind of the state of mind. This comes up a lot in property law because a lot of it's always depending what did the person intend. Intent is very hard to show. Facts, objective evidence, that's easy enough to show. So, okay, any questions on state of mind before we move on? Sir?
So you're saying the aggressive trespass, the person must be aware of the fact that he doesn't have title on his purposes sitting on it and knowing that?
Yes, yes, yes. Or I guess alternatively, if it happens, he has a defective deed. He says, "I know this is defective, but I'm going to be here anyway." I can see that happening in that kind of case either. All right, so we have the stalling standards, we have the fill standards. Good, I'll remember that. All right, so now let's talk about something called color of title. And to introduce this, I'm actually going to bring up the Texas code. It's in one of these tabs, I think it is. Oh, I just closed it. Here it is. Okay, and I'm going to use a Texas statute because this is probably what most people will end up using in a couple of years if you do property law. Adverse possession. Okay, here we go. Okay, so let's look at this one first. So under the Texas code, so section 16, subsection 24. Like Mr. Robinson said, he checked his law books, he did his homework. Texas has a 3-year period for adverse possession. But it's only 3 years when this is present. Color of title. What is color of title? In the back?
Isn't it when you have a fake document or something that you can present that would give you title or fake title claim?
Well, Texas defines it, so let's just read this. You're correct, but this is specifically how Texas defines it. It's a chain of transfers, which just means I deed the property to you. That is not regular, which means it's messed up somehow because of immuniment, and that's some old Latin word that means some sort of property attribute. That is not properly recorded, or is only in writing, or because of a similar defect that does not want. Bobbledygook, what that means is the title's defective. This usually happens, say, if the sheriff holds a tax sale and he's selling lots 14, 15, and 16, but it turns out that lot 14 actually was not for sale, that it had taxes paid on it. Or say someone recorded a deed, but it was already owned by someone else. We'll talk about this later about deed recording statutes, where, say, I'm a crook. I deed you and you the same piece of land. One of you will get it, one of you won't. And sometimes it depends on who gets it first, who records it first, whatever. But say you're the second person who gets it, you don't have it. So, in other words, Texas defines adverse possession in terms of color of title. This is the easiest one at 3 years. So, yes, sir?
What's a head right?
Head right? I don't know. I'm not sure. This was in the other statute before? I think that's some kind of document record. I'm not exactly sure. I can check that later. I'll make a note to check that later. I'll answer that in the next class. I'm not sure. The statute, though, is for 3 years if you have this color of title. So a person must bring suit to recover real property held by another in peaceable and adverse possession under title or color of title not later than 3 years after the date. So who brings the suit, the squatter or the owner? I heard mumbling. Okay, who here thinks the owner brings suit? Okay, squatter. Oh, that's not all of you. Yes, ma'am.
Wouldn't you bring it to clear the title? Wouldn't the squatter bring suit to clear title?
Mm-hmm. So a person must bring suit to recover real property held by another in peaceful and adverse possession. Who is the person? The owner, yeah. Who's holding it in adverse possession? Squatter, right. So the owner must bring suit within 3 years against the squatter. So to answer your question about quieting title, Texas law is actually really complicated with who has to bring the suit. And I was actually talking with a Texas lawyer who does this kind of stuff, and he said the line between quieting title and bringing it under this statute is actually really nebulous, and even Texas courts are somewhat conflicted on it. So just for simplicity's sake, we'll just worry about this one. I'm not going to go into quieting title because he told me about this case. It's actually going to trial, I think, next week or so, where I think the squatter brought it under one, and the owner brought it under the other, and then it's just a mess. So we'll just keep it simple and just looking at the statute here. So we have the owner who has to bring suit against the squatter. And if I bring it on exactly 3 years and 1 day, is it good? So it has to be less than 3 years. Why? What happens after 3 years? What happens after 3 years?
The possessor takes.
It's his. And after 3 years, that's when quiet title comes into play. Because after 3 years, you can no longer bring an adverse possession suit because you're saying you haven't had it for 3 years, before 3 years. If it's after 3 years, you can't claim you can't challenge the adverse possession because the title's been transferred. Once 3 years elapsed of continuous, open, notorious, hostile use, the title's gone. If you're the original owner, you're out of luck, buddy. You might claim something like the von Valkenburg saying, well, they might have had it, but they weren't using all of it, and maybe they weren't cultivating it, or maybe it wasn't adverse, maybe it was a mistake. You have these different defenses, but the statute on its face, you're screwed after 3 years, so make sure you don't sit on your laurels. So this is a very short time. So if someone has this defective deed, there's a serious onus to bring this suit quickly. Now let's scroll down a little bit. There's 3 actual provisions under the Texas Code. I'm only going to focus on the 3 year and the 10 year because the 5 year is kind of rare. So I can't put these both at the same time. Maybe I can. Okay. Not really. Anyway, I can't put it both at the same time. So here we have the 10-year limitation rule. And this one's a little bit longer, as you can probably tell. But the long and short of it is you don't need color of title. This works for anything. Anyone who has any claim to land for more than 10 years can rely on this statute. Okay? So what happens here? A person must bring suit not later than 10 years after the date the cause of action accrues, held in peaceful adverse possession. You notice there's nothing about color of title because that's not a requirement here. And it even says, without a title of instrument, meaning you have no paperwork. You have nothing to prove it's yours. So this means if someone's squatting on your land and you know they don't have any title or paperwork, you have up to 10 years to fix them out. Why do you think the Texas legislators and infinite wisdom in Austin would do this? Why are there 3 years with color of title and then 10 years without? What kind of motivation do you think they have for that one? You have a Longhorn shirt on, so you're getting cold. I'm sorry.
A long?
Is that UT?
Yeah.
Yeah. I got to see the orange. We'll have fun when football season starts.
Okay.
Because now with the SEC and the SEC and the Big 12, you have different. Or is it still called the Big 12? Whatever.
There's a few teams.
I went to Penn State, so just leave me alone. just don't even. All right. So why do you think the Texas legislature, when they're making the statutes, made a 3-year period if you have color of title, meaning you have some paperwork, or a 10-year period if you have no paperwork? Why do you think that kind of dichotomy is there?
Maybe they want to make it harder because harder to prove.
Harder for whom? Let's be clear. So why would the color of title one be less time? Why would that have less time?
The date of when it started. An actual paper that shows like the intention from the time. Rather, in the other one it just shows, and you can kind of like speculate.
Next year, yes.
Would it be because you want to protect the liquidated purchaser?
Okay, explain that more.
So if you were under the belief that you could obtain this title by buying it from someone that they didn't have that kind of a transfer, you have a society has more of an interest in protecting their interests as opposed to someone who's stealing.
I think that's right. And let's put this in the view of the owner. So if I own land, I have to bring within 3 years. That puts a very strong burden on me, meaning if someone else thinks they own it and they're living on it, and I think I have this claim and they have paperwork, I gotta get on this quick. I can't let this sit around, because if I let this go longer than 3 years, they're gonna build a house, they're gonna raise their family, they're gonna chase after kids, they're gonna do other things, and if I come in year 4, I'm gonna be a jerk. I'm gonna say, hey, that was my land all along. It makes it tougher. So this would not be the stalling standard. This makes it very difficult to do this after 3 years. Because once 3 years is up, you're out of luck. The 10-year one, though, kind of is a little bit easier. Say, you have this piece of property and there's really no paperwork regarding it, and some guy's living on it, and you're not really thinking about it. Kind of more time elapses, and you have more time to kind of get around to it. The person on it with the 10-year statute has less of a claim to it than the person for 3 years. We kind of feel more empathy. There's a Phillips standard. We feel empathy for the person who has some paperwork which might be defective, and we go after them after 3 years. Does that make sense? Yes, sir?
By bringing suit, do you mean an entire petition with a cause of action, or do you mean just calling the police for eviction?
I didn't understand your question.
When it says the owner must bring suit, is that like a full petition in district court with a cause of action, or is that just calling the police?
Well, if 10 years have elapsed, you can't call the cops on it because it's not yours.
Prior to that.
If it's prior to that, then you can, of course, try and call the police. This really only kicks in after 10 years, meaning you can't file any kind of action to eject. To answer your question, the action is one of ejectment. You're trying to eject the person. So say you call the cops and the guy's not getting off the land, you can file an action of ejectment in court. And at that point, they would kind of quiet the title and figure out who has what. So I don't want to get too much into the intricacies of the Texas procedure because it's really kind of complicated. All these kind of statutes work in and out. If you take a land use class later, they'll go into this in much more detail. But just for purposes, just think of the limitation periods and when you have to do your thing before. Okay?
Professor,
yes,
question. So the only way to toll that 10-year period of the statute is by putting through pleading at court.
Yeah, well, that's what Mr. Robinson tried to do. He filed, I remember on the screen, that affidavit of adverse possession. That's actually a procedure under Texas law where you say, I'm on this land as of today. And that's how you kind of start the clock. And that leaves no question for anyone of when you started because you actually went to court, you had it notarized and everything else, and then you can move on. Sir? Phil?
If you're doing what Mr. Robinson did, did they also, I guess, send like a copy or notice to, I assume, the bank or who actually owned the land that say like, hey, someone's adversely possessing your land or not?
No, and in fact, one of the reasons why that affidavit is not as good as Mr. Robinson thinks of it, it's not service of process. Like in CivPro, if you want to sue someone, you have to make sure they get some service of process. I'm sure Bank of America found out about this on the local news, and they watched it. That's why the open and notorious BIG, that's why you have this notoriety standard. The guy has to know. It's not enough that Robinson's seeing the house by himself and just twiddling his thumbs. He has to sort of notice the person who owns it, and I'm pretty sure him going on the local news was what did him in, because the bank found out about it. He would have just been kind of laying low key. You'll find a lot, perhaps not in such affluent areas, but elsewhere we have foreclosed houses, especially in California. You have squatters living there for years, and they are tolling SOL, statute of limitations. They're just going to go all the way. So okay, let's just take a look what we got here. So the application, Justin works. So I don't want to get too bogged down into the actual procedures. We can talk about this later after class because it's kind of complicated which action you bring. Just know that if someone is on your land and the 3 years hasn't run, you can call the cops and kick them out. If they don't get out, then you might want to file an action in ejectment in court, in which the court can actually issue an order to get them out of there. Although sheriffs would usually probably just kick them out in the first instance. Okay. Okay. So squatter on land for 6 years, owner brings suit, squatter files a pleading saying I have color of title and thus invoke the rule. How would the squatter have had color of title in the first place? He got like a defective deed or something?
Yeah, I mean, would he just show his deed
Yeah.
to the court?
Yeah, and then if he can prove he was on the land for 3 years, then he's in. Okay. All right, I'll come back to this in a minute. So let's move on to the next area. So we have color of title, and that I think is pretty self-explanatory. You just have to have some sort of title or whatever. The next doctrine which I want to talk about is kind of called constructive possession. Have you guys ever seen the word constructive in other areas of law? Have you seen that word? Where have you seen it?
Constructive notice.
What is that?
It's where you do something that puts someone else on notice without actually objectively or expressively telling them.
Okay. Any other use of the word constructive? Yes.
Constructive firing, where they basically force them out.
Constructive discharge, exactly. It's where you'll see this in labor law if you take it. It's constructive discharge is where someone actually quits, they resign, but they claim that the conditions were so untenable they couldn't actually stay on in their job. So the word constructive in law generally means you do something without actually doing it, meaning you're fired without actually getting fired. You're giving someone notice without actually giving them notice. And constructive possession is you have possession without actually having possession. It's kind of this this legal fiction almost. So constructive adverse possession means something like this. So say you have title. Say you're squatting on part of the land but not the rest of it, and say you're the only one there. Even though you've only squatted on part of it, under some jurisdictions you can actually gain title to the entire thing. Going back to the von Valkenburg case, that might have helped Mr. Lutz, saying, well, I have my chicken coop here, my garden here, and yeah, this area of the trees I wasn't using. In some cases that would have been enough, but the court in New York didn't kind of really look at it. So constructive possession is just that. It's it's where you squat on part of it, but you get actual possession of all of it. And let's do the book has some decent problems that are a little bit tricky, so I wanted to go over them. So these are the problems from the book. I think you guys looked at. Who wants to do question number 1? I'm just going to start on a new row. Right here? Question 1. This is on page 135. Yeah. If you want to take a minute to read it, that's fine. And I'll go over it in a second. So what we have here is we have O. And O has been in possession of this 100-acre farm for 40-something years. In 1994, A entered to the back 40 acres, and he had a defective deed, so he has color of title, but he had no claim for the land for the entire 100 acres, meaning his deed was only for the back 40. A's occupied the back 40, cultivated, etc. A then tries to evict O from the farm, can claim title by constructive possession. This one's actually a little bit tricky. So what do you think happens here? It's kind of a trick question. It's not fair. I'll let you try and answer it.
I guess that A would get it.
No. A. You said A or O?
A.
Meaning the original owner.
No, O's the original owner.
Right. This one's tricky because O is still in possession, and the way the question's written, O never lost possession. And it's kind of an unfair question. See, the first sentence, O owns and been in possession. So as far as we know, O still owns the other 60 acres, and still been in possession of those 60 acres. So this is something of a trick question, which I don't particularly like, but I want to clear that up because it might have been tricky. Because O has been in possession of those 60 acres, A can't get constructive possession of the entire farm. So he can perhaps keep his little 40 acres, but he can't kick O out of the entire thing. So that one, yes, sir?
But then A could still get the 40 acres.
Yes, right, and that's why the question says, A brings suit to evict O from the farm, meaning the entire farm. So that question was unnecessarily tricky. But the second question I like better. So do you want to do the second question?
Sure.
So I'll read it, and you can take a minute to read it. So you have 2 lots, 1 and 2. X owns 1, Y owns 2. And X and Y are not in possession. See, that fact, X and Y are not in possession, that fact wasn't in the first question. So you have to just keep an eye open, see who's actually there. So what happens? The lots are conveyed by an invalid deed from Z. We don't know who Z is, but it doesn't really matter. Z conveys, the lots are conveyed by a valid deed from Z to A. So Z gives the lot to A, number 1. And then A occupies lot 1. Then subsequently, A sues X and Y to quiet title to lots 1 and 2. What happens?
Not quite exactly sure when I was reading this, but on first glance, it seems to me that A would get both lots.
Okay.
They're not, because X and Y are not in possession, but I'm not sure how.
Let's go back to the for election notes from a minute ago. What are the 4 elements of adverse possession?
Entry, not to be open and notorious and continuous for a statutory period.
Okay.
And also adverse under claim for
What's missing here from these 4 elements?
entry.
Did A ever enter? No, if you go back to the problem.
Yes, if A occupies.
Enters one lot
No, I'm sorry. Did you enter both of them?
No, just the one.
So can A have a claim to number 2 if he didn't enter it? So even if it's open, notorious, everything else. Yeah, these questions are a little bit tricky because they kind of play. He entered the first one, but he never entered 2, and he has no claim to number 2. If he had entered 2, then A wins against X and Y because he has a good deed. Then he can gain constructive possession of the entirety, but he never actually entered 2, so he can't see it. Yes, sir.
I'm assuming then that it also has to do with the fact that they're partitions.
Yes,
Therefore, you
they're different lots.
Okay.
I mean, the fact that, like the Lutzes, the fact that 14 and 15 next to each other, that's of no moment because they're separate lots. We talk about meets and bounds and property where everything begins and ends. So that's that. Let me give you another problem. This is not from the book. So A owns Blackacre and he deeds it to B, and B never uses it. A's son, S, thinks that he owns it, meaning he got his inheritance, and he deeds it to C. So we have A gives this land to B, but B never uses it. A's son then gives it to C, and then C cultivates 5 of the 500 acres. B never entered it and never did anything with it. What happens? Does C gain constructive possession of all of it, or just 5 acres? Why all of it?
Because he cultivated part of it, and by doing that, he got constructive possession of the rest of it.
Exactly. C has color of title. That's exactly right. C had a deed. It was defective. He got it from the son. The son didn't actually have it, so he didn't write it. But he cultivated it, and then B never entered. That's kind of a more simpler question than I think you'll get than the questions from the textbook, which I think are meant to try and trick you. Okay. Let's go back here. All right. So let's move on to Manila v. Gorski, which is another funny case from my next home state. Has anyone of you ever actually been to New Jersey? 3 of you? Oh my God.
She's from New Jersey.
Oh my God. What's your name?
Cassandra.
Cassandra? Okay. All right, Gil. I'm sorry. We're in Jersey.
Burlington County.
I've been there very many times. I'm from Staten Island, which is probably about 30 minutes away. You will get an unfortunate Northeast lesson in this class. I apologize. But all right, Cassandra, sorry, this is yours.
Sure.
You ever been to Keensburg, New Jersey?
I don't know. I moved from there when I was 6.
Oh, well. If you've ever seen the South Park episode about Jersey Shore, you can figure out the rest of the line. So this place called Keensburg Amusement Park, which is like this really trashy amusement park that's right on the Jersey Shore. It's meant for little kids and slides and stuff, but it's pretty lame. But anyway, this case actually originated in Keensburg, New Jersey. Okay, so Cassandra, what happened in this case?
So a woman and her husband had purchased some land in 1946. They obtained title in 1952, and then Manila acquired the lot right next to it in the next year. So then they had made some improvements to the lot, or to the home, and they had did something with the stairs, or like they elevated the house or something, so they had to make different stairs, and so they decided to make a pathway that would extend, a concrete pathway that would extend from the front of the lot all the way to the back. And bottom line, it ended up, I guess, going onto Manila's property by 15 inches.
Yeah. So this happens a lot. Very frequently, adverse possession cases happen with boundary disputes. This is not like Mr. Robinson who's squatting in a house, or the von Valkenburgs who are like toiling away in the fields in this triangular plot in Yonkers. It's usually a matter of inches. The friend I was talking to is a lawyer. It had to do with the placement of a fence. And it's something really trivial. Is the fence here, or is it like here? And then you have to do a survey to figure out where it is. Usually the adverse possession cases are very trivial. So we have this case where these two houses, the Gorskys made this, what do you call it? They had to raise the house up and kind of put these steps that went over 15 inches. The facts aren't too important. What is important is the kind of split opinions in this case. there are really two lines of cases. One I think we can call the stalling standard, and one kind of the Phillips standard. Have you ever been to Maine? Good, good, good. So what's the standard for Maine in this case? How did the Maine line of cases, the Preble line of cases, handle it?
Mistake, right? Mistake one.
Mm-hmm.
If he had to intentionally know he was doing it, just a mistake isn't enough.
Right. So here, the owner of the stairs was, he was mistaken. He thought he had it, but he didn't really have it. So if you were in Maine in the 1890s, this case would come out not in your favor. The reason why is adverse possession can't be premised on a mistake. You can't say, I thought the boundary was here, but it was actually here. You can't base your claim on that. What are the kind of rationales for this reason? Why would you not want to reward people who make a mistake? Doesn't it seem a little perverse that the person who gets rewarded is not the one who tries to do things right, but the person who intentionally wants to do something wrong? That if you have, your property there and you think it's yours, but you're trying to be a good person, you're in luck. I mean, you have luck. But if you're a jerk like Mr. Robinson, then you get it. You want to see kind of a perverse standard there? Yeah? Okay. Now, anyone ever been to Connecticut? Anyone else? Anyone know? Connecticut. Massachusetts. Do people leave Texas? Okay, in the back, yes. Thank you. So, okay, you've been to Connecticut, borders Massachusetts?
Yes.
Okay, good. So what is the standard from Connecticut?
Is that the one, whether or not the entry is caused by mistake or intent, the same result occurs?
Exactly.
And the true owner is ultimately on state.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This case is French v. Pierce, this Connecticut standard. It doesn't look to motivation. Remember before we talked about state of mind and whether we want to look at what people actually think and what people do. The stalling standard would be we look at what they think. Did they make a mistake or not? The standard from Connecticut is we don't look at the motivation, we look at what they actually did. The very act of entry is the assertion. It doesn't matter if it's a mistake. Which is easier to prove? The stalling standard or the Connecticut standard, or the Phillips standard? Yes, in the back?
Sorry.
Which is easier to prove, the standard from Maine or the standard from Connecticut?
The standard for Connecticut.
Why?
Just because you're not looking at motivation, you're just looking at interaction.
Right. So this was a Connecticut standard from an 1831 case. So you guys are in New Jersey. My apologies. You're members of the New Jersey Supreme Court. You are the court of last resort in the Garden State. You have very pressing matters, urgent things to do. You have a dilemma. Decades earlier, your court, your previous justices had accepted the standard from Maine. A lot of the commentaries and idiot professors like me had been writing these articles saying that's not fair, that's not just. And because you are the court of last resort, you can change precedent. You can change things. You're not bound by stare decisis. So let's just see a show of hands. How many of you, if you're sitting in New Jersey in 1969, would have kept the standard from Maine? No one? Stalling? Is that it?
I would.
2? 3? Okay. Who would have kept the standard from Maine? Raise your hands. Okay. Why?
Well, because I think it needs to be. I think the intent is important because you can't just walk in and take the property like that without. I think the intent matters.
Ma'am?
It encourages people to be more careful, and if you allow mistake for it to be premised on mistake, or you don't look at the state of mind, then you make up whatever excuse with it.
Okay. Anyone else like the Maine standard? We got a lot of bleeding horse in this class. This will be fun. Okay. So I assume the rest of you like the Connecticut standard. Okay. For those of you who like the Connecticut standard, what do you think the strongest counter argument is? Why do you think the what do you think the strongest counter rationale is? Sort of the kind of coral shirt. Yes.
I think the mistake part, where if you do make a mistake, you lose, or if you don't correct their mistake, I guess you could say, you lose your property.
I mean, what does this do to homeowners? I mean, imagine that your neighbor built this thing on top of your property, and he never bothered checking. He never did his due diligence. Never went to get a survey. He willy-nilly built this concrete, ghastly steps over your property. I mean, that might piss you off.
This is the owner of the property to ensure that someone's not encroaching on their property to begin with.
Colin?
It's just like it says later on in this case, that how in the world are you going to know if they encroach by 15 inches? So like it's hard to make sure they don't encroach on your property if it's such a...
Yeah. The other standard, the French standard, is very hard to administer because there's really no way of checking what's going on. So, Cassandra, what did the fine justices of the Garden State do with this case? Did they stick with the old standard, or they brought in the new one?
They allowed, they went with the Connecticut standard. They allowed force to be adversely possessed by the state.
Okay. But that didn't resolve the case.
She wants to help me.
Yeah, I'm following her now.
I was just going to say they remanded it. They had several issues that they remanded it.
Why did they remand it?
They needed to know whether the true owner had actual knowledge of the encroachment.
Mm-hmm.
And if he didn't, then they wanted to move on to whether the plaintiff should have to convey that to the defendants.
Mm-hmm.
And then if that answer was yes, they wanted to know how much should be paid in consideration of that.
Is that difficult? Is that a lot of work?
Yeah.
And how the hell are they going to prove that? Yeah, I think Stalling was right. I think the biggest deficiency of the standard is it's really hard to administer, and it's tough to kind of figure out what's going on. You have these standards, and that's why I kind of like the Phillips and the Stalling standard, where you have these really bright line rules that are easy to administer, but they're unfair. And then you have these kind of flexible standards that are kind of fair, but they really make it hard for people to administer. So now you have to go and conduct a survey, find exactly where it was. There's something which no one could have possibly known ex ante looking forward. And it's a lot of work. Oddly enough, on remand, or after remand, they settled the case for $250. So it's kind of funny that after all this litigation, it looked to the highest court in the Garden State. They went to Trenton. I mean, going from Keensburg to Trenton, that's a big deal. That's like, you gotta get into the Garden State Parkway for that, and that's a lot of driving. But the difficulty with that is you've litigated this all the way up. So, and the ghost of Eric Fitz, who's Eric? Oh.
He's alive. He's alive.
I guess this is like, was it Daniel Day-Lewis? Was that what's that movie? Blood, No Country for Old Men. No, There Will Be Blood. Yeah, I didn't get that. Have you seen Daniel Day-Lewis in the Abraham Lincoln movie? How he looks pretty realistic. Very cool. No, not Abe Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. Abraham Lincoln. It's made by Steven Spielberg. It's like a legitimate movie. It's not like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies or Sensibilities and Sea Monsters. It's actually a legit movie. All right. So I think this case tees up an interesting aspect of just general law, and I'd like to end on this note. One of the reasons why we study cases, because they're not always good, they're not always bad. They always have contrasting views. And the reason why books or cases are big for a case book is they kind of exemplify this. And I think you'll find throughout the course of the semester kind of trends and patterns and kind of what sense of rules you like and dislike. Do you like kind of the easy rule that's easy to administer, or do you like the tough, the kind of flexible rule that creates a lot of exceptions? And you see in this case, the Gorski case, when you make an exception and you have some sort of uncertainty, eventually the courts have to do a lot of juggling and dancing around to try and make it work, which creates a lot of problems in the end. I'm not advocating one or the other, but I think you need to be attuned to it, especially when we get to other cases. This is probably one of the last good appellate cases we'll do for a while, because then we do a lot of kind of old English style stuff that's not quite as interesting. But I think, and I'll run you through the syllabus, which is how I'll end the class. When we start doing the land transactions, this is going to be a lot more kind of black letter stuff. It's going to be a lot more simpler, and contracts of sale as well. But when we get to kind of past mortgages, recording systems, chain of titles, title insurance, easements start getting a little bit more interesting, because then you have people who don't like each other and fighting, and they always get in trouble. Covenants as well, that's very difficult. That's when you don't want your land to give to someone else. You have some very interesting characters here. Zoning becomes very tricky because it involves people's property rights, and you actually have the state rather than individuals taking over property rights. So it's going to be a different, slightly different dynamic. One class which I'll just focus on is this one, which I think you'll enjoy. I'm going to try and do one class on zoning in Houston, or really the lack thereof. I'm sure you're probably familiar with it. I've been living here 3 weeks. I'm already kind of seeing it. How you have a waste zone right next to a skyscraper. But I think you'll like it. For takings and eminent domain, I'm actually working on getting a guest speaker for this class. His name is Clark Neely. He worked for the law firm that litigated Kelo, and he'll give some really good experience. He's been in eminent domain litigation for 15 years, and he's actually a Texan too, so he'll be good here. But I'm trying to get him here this day. I'm pretty sure I got it. Then we do takings and wrap it up. The second to last class, I'm not exactly sure I'm doing it. I think I know, but I'm not going to tell you probably until about halfway through, depending on how the class progresses. And the last session will be a final exam review. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to run that. I might do a sample question and go over in class, rather than just kind of run through the entire materials. That might be more productive, but I'm not sure. We have about 5 minutes left. I'll let you out early in the first day. Are there any questions? All right, thank you very much. Yeah, no, that's fine. I don't think it's Andrew.
Good question. I read that final exam. Where did you read that? On course selection.
I wasn't allowed to give a take home.
It's what?
The faculty handbook doesn't permit take home.
Oh, really? I read it.
Yeah, it says that Take some cookies, please. Take cookies. As many as you can. I got a lot left. Give it to your friends.